So that was pretty cool, and maybe you'd want to learn how to disintegrate things yourself? Well, if so, you came to the right place, because in this Blender tutorial, we're going to be learning how to do the 3D disintegration effect using a few clever modifiers and some tips and tricks along the way, all within Blender. First off, I'd like to thank Disintegrate for sponsoring this video. Disintegrate is a render farm designed specifically for Blender. It's easy to use and has a great interface with great pricing. Plus, you get $20 free credit when you sign up. Check it out using the link below. And stick around for the end of the tutorial when we render out our final animation using Blender Grid. Also, like always, you can download the finished blend file for this tutorial over on my Patreon page. For just $3 a month, you get access to all the finished downloads on my channel. If you're interested in it, check it out with the Patreon link below. And let's get into the tutorial. Alright, so go ahead and fire up a new scene in Blender. I'm using Blender 2.79, and we can get started. So, first off, before I get into the visual effect that you saw at the beginning of the tutorial, I kind of want to explain how this effect works by using a simple object, but pretty much you can disintegrate anything you want in Blender using this technique. It's really awesome, and I was amazed when I actually got to work, because I wasn't sure if it would work, but it works really great, and here's how you do it. So first off, I'm going to delete the default cube, like always. The poor default cube never makes it very far. And then I'm going to shift A, and I'm going to add in a monkey head. So we'll disintegrate this monkey head for this tutorial. I'm just going to jump to front view here, and we'll just kind of rotate him a little bit to make it look a little bit cooler. Something like that, scale him up a little bit. Okay, now first off, we're going to give our monkey head a vertex group. So I'm going to open this up a little bit here, tab to edit mode, grab everything, jump to our vertex groups here, and under vertex group, go new vertex group, and assign it all to the vertex group. With that done, we can just deselect it and get out of there. Alright, now we want to add another object that is going to determine what areas of our monkey head gets disintegrated and what areas don't. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in sometimes using kind of a cool object that isn't just square is kind of nice, because it doesn't, it isn't like a straight line across, but it kind of disintegrates in different parts then. So I'm just going to actually use another monkey head as a disintegration object. I think, yeah, new monkey head. We'll scale this up a bit bigger. And this is going to be the one that disintegrates. So we can kind of, to make them look different, I'm just going to go ahead into the object settings here and change this one to wired. So this one's wired, and this one's the object that's rendered. So just change the texture draw there to wired. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe on this object. We want to make sure it's a little bigger than that one. I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe right around 30, so we'll leave it blank for a little while. Then I'm going to set a keyframe, so go I, and we'll go lock location and rotation, so lock rot. And then I'm going to jump, well, we'll have the disintegration effect happen over the course of, say, 60 frames. It's probably good. Well, maybe we'll just go 70. And then I'm going to pull it over the monkey head, right about there. And we can kind of give it some rotation, so it kind of does some cool effects as it comes over it. And I'll go ahead and insert location rotation again. So the reason I'm rotating it is just because this way we'll kind of hit it with the chin first, and then the rest of the body will come over, so it looks like just parts of it being removed, and then the rest of it all gets removed. So just basically it's going to be using the collision of the monkey to determine what areas are disintegrating. Okay, so before we can do any more, I need to kind of blow up our monkey head, but actually blow it up but keep it together. That sounds kind of weird, but basically I'm going to use the explode modifier to break it into a whole bunch of pieces, but it will stay together until this touches it, and then those pieces will be simulated. So to do this, I'm just going to first add a particle system, because we need a particle system for the explode modifier. So I'm going to go particles, and I'll go new. We're going to leave it at emitter, but I want it to start and end at 1, so it starts immediately and puts all the particles out. And I don't want it to shoot them out at all. I want them to stay stagnant. So I'm going to turn off the emitter geometry, turn that down to 0. And then at the bottom, I'm just going to take away the gravity. So the field weights, I'm going to go to 0. And that's all we have to do for the particle settings. Now in our modifier tab, I'm going to add modifier, and we're going to use the explode modifier. Now this is going to basically blow up our mesh into a whole bunch of individual pieces, keeping it under one object. The pieces will be visible in edit mode, and that's perfect. Choosing cut edges will give you some cooler, sharp edges. And if you wanted to disintegrate basically a whole bunch of little pieces, you could first apply a subdivision surface modifier, and this will give you even smaller disintegrating pieces, which is cool for different effects. But in this case, it will play back in real time faster if we leave it as is. And we can just apply this explode modifier. And once that's done, we can delete our particle system. And to show you what it did, I'm going to tab into edit mode. And if I hit L under face select mode, you can see that we have all these individual pieces. Instead of it being one object, we have all these individual pieces. And that's perfect to disintegrate it now. So with that done, we're going to add another modifier. And this one is going to be a vertex weight proximity. So we're going to use a vertex weight proximity modifier to tell it when it should be disintegrating, using this object as the collision basically. So the vertex group is going to be that vertex group we created in the beginning, and the target object is going to be Suzanne 1. Actually, wait a minute. These names... Okay, yeah, Suzanne 1. We could name that something else to be a little bit more organized, but we get that 1 is the collision one. All right, now I'm going to change the distance to geometry, as I found it worked best, and face. Okay, and now I'm going to switch the fall off. We can just leave it at linear. Oh, let's go ahead and give it a smooth, actually. It might give a little better effect. And now if I switch to weight paint mode, I can see exactly when the collision object comes over, and I can tweak my settings here to be appropriate. So I want it to be completely blue when this object is over it, because we're going to be using the weight paint to set up a pin on our cloth simulation, which is going to be giving it the disintegration effect. So at frame 100, I want this to be completely blue. So I'm going to take the highest and crank it up a bit. And then I'm going to take the lowest and crank it up a bit as well. So let me take the high down a little bit now, actually, because once the low is up, it's pretty good. And we can just kind of play through, and we can see that we can take this down even more. And we need to take the low down a little bit too. But we want to make sure that in the beginning, it's completely red. And so we need to take the low back just a little bit more, and the high back just a little bit more. And it looks like 1.2, 1.4 will work. And then at frame 100, it's completely blue. So that's perfect. That will work good. So in object mode now, with this set up, we can go ahead and add a cloth simulation. So I'm going to go to our object settings here, add in a cloth simulation. I'm going to go ahead and give this a mass. Oh, actually, I'm just going to choose the preset of silk. And then I'm going to give it a little bit less structure. I'm going to take that down to a 3, a little bit less mass, take that down to a 1, and then give it a little bit of air. This kind of slows down the thickness of the air, basically, so it kind of floats in the air a bit more instead of just dropping really quickly, which I found made it look a little better. So I'm going to give that about a 2. So the structural is basically how strong the cloth is, and I want it to be really flappy because it's like a particle, like the skin almost falling off of this monkey head. So something like that is good, and that's why I chose silk to kind of give it that that fine, not so dense material. But okay, so with that set up, I'm just going to add in a force field. We're going to choose wind, and I'm going to kind of point it upwards and maybe towards the camera a little bit, just by hitting R twice and rotating it. So it's kind of blowing it towards the camera / away. The camera will be over here. I can go ahead and set the camera up here too, just Alt-Control-0 for this example. And then I'm going to crank the strength all the way up to something like 400. I found you had to go pretty high for this cloth simulation. And then I can give it a little bit of noise as well. And actually, you can also go ahead and add a turbulence modifier just to give some cool sort of noise as well. Crank the strength of that up pretty high. We're going to go to like a 20. Okay. Just make sure your modifiers or your force fields are on the same layer, otherwise it won't affect it. So with that done, we can go ahead and choose pinning on our cloth simulation, and then we're going to choose that group. And that group, as we can see here, because the cloth modifier is below it, we'll be taking this group after it's modified by this modifier and using it as the pin value for our cloth simulation. So cool. And I'm going to take the quality down just a little bit real quick so we can get some faster real-time playback. And when I play it, we should see it disintegrate as soon as it touches it and just blow away. And it's pretty cool looking. So you can see we get the wind kind of blowing it at you, and then it's just slowly falling into the distance, and that is the effect. Now, one other thing that I did that made it look even cooler is I took our object here and I duplicated it and I scaled it down just a little bit. So it's basically inside of the other monkey head. Now, you might have to do a little bit of modifications because you can see if we go in edit mode here, it's not scaling evenly, so it's not inside it all over. So you might have to go to proportional editing here real quick and choose connected, or no, just not connected, enabled, and kind of pull certain areas in, maybe scale it down just a little bit more, and then pull certain areas in just to kind of hide any vertices that are poking out. So I'm going to quick do that here. Just move around the vertices that are extruding out of the mesh because we want to be inside the mesh. You could probably use sculpt mode to do this as well, but just go ahead and do that. Pull it all in. I'm just going to do a rough job and not worry too much about it because it doesn't really matter for this example. Something like that. And then this ear needs to just be back in there, something like that. We'll have a little bit of errors because I'm not doing a real clean job on this, but this is just the example. Okay, so with that inside of it, enough, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this object a collision object. So I'm going to take away the cloth on Suzanne 2, and this is just going to be a collision. And you can mess with these settings, but I'm just going to leave them as they are. I'll scale it down just a tad bit more. Scale on the X maybe as well, or Y. Kind of pull it in just, well, I'll leave it as it is. Too much experimenting. But with that set up now, if I play our simulation again, we can see it's going to be a little slower because we have the collision object now. But it's even cooler looking because the fabric is kind of ripped around the shape of the object instead of just blowing away in the wind, which gives it even a cooler looking effect, as you can see here, as it kind of comes off and is ripped like around it, and you can see it kind of like sliding down the side of it and stuff then. So it gives it a really cool effect when you add a collision object like that. Because I didn't do a real clean job, you have some particles still kind of stuck there, which, I mean, it could be cool if that's what you're going for, but it wasn't it wasn't what I was going for. But as you can see, that is the effect for disintegrating something. Alright, so with that done, I'm going to quick show you guys now how to do this as a visual effect, like that shot you saw at the beginning of the tutorial. Okay, so in a blank scene in Blender now, I'm going to recreate that visual effect shot, and to do this, I'm just going to start by adding it in as a background. So go to background images here, drop it down, and we have to add in our raw video shot in the background. So these video clips will be included in the description. If you just check that, you'll find the download links. But first off, I have a video here that I want only viewed from the camera. So let me open this up, click match movie length for the clips, auto refresh cycle, and then I'm going to choose the view to be only camera. So then I'm going to go to front view and go Alt Control 0 to snap our camera here, and you can see our video in the background. Now this video is just this, it's not refreshing, let me see, match movie length, there we go. This video is just a model kind of posing here, and then we're going to have it disintegrate right around frame 90 or so. Actually, a little bit sooner than that, more like frame 60 or so. You want to quick change your frame rate settings to be the same as the background video here. So change that to 23, just 23 FPS, almost 24, but not quite, just to make it confusing. But once that's set up, we can go ahead and close our tab there and go into camera view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the frame that I want disintegrated, which is right here as soon as she stops moving. So right around frame 74. So right at frame 74, I'm going to do a quick model of this model. At this pose, I want to quick model the shape of this girl using, well, we can just use the cube really. Also, you want to kind of set your camera settings to match that of the video. And I'm assuming the video is probably about a 55 millimeter. I can't tell for sure, but I don't have the information, unfortunately. But it doesn't really matter as long as you're close. And then I'm going to grab my camera and pull it out a little bit further, just so that cube kind of fits over her. It's kind of a good size, maybe even zooming out a little bit more, and we'll scale the cube up a little bit. But basically, I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to do a really rough model of this person by, let me scale it down, use it as the head real quick, tab into edit mode, double W and subdivide a few times, and I'm not going to show you guys the whole process because it's going to be just quick and dirty, but I'm basically going to box model it, and then I'm going to switch to sculpting and do just a really quick sculpt of it. So this is going to look, well, this is probably going to look pretty funny actually, if I'm being honest, but it should actually get the effect done. So I'm going to grab these vertices here, choose that so we can see through. And this is just a really rough box model. I'm going to extrude the edges out here. So we have the shoulders here, extrude them out so we have the shoulders as well. And then I'm going to grab the bottom vertices. And basically, we just want this model to fit the perimeter in our video. So we want to fit right with the edges of this model when we're in camera view. And it doesn't really matter if it matches everything else. The closer you can get in the different areas to show some 3 dimension, the cooler it will look, but it isn't completely necessary. It'll just give it a better effect if you can do that. So I'm just kind of meshing up the edges here. And then I'm going to let's just grab these and extrude them down. So we kind of have that. And then grab these too and pull them over. So we have this really rough effect here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode and sculpt it. So we have that. Whoops, pull that over. Okay. And now I'm going to go into sculpt mode, and I'm going to choose Dino Topology. And I don't want to go crazy detail because this is going to be, again, we're going to be ripping it apart and simulating it all. But I'm going to choose constant detail and experiment with a little bit to see what a good detail is. That's a little too high, maybe 12. That's even higher, so we want to go lower. Maybe like a 3, and 3 looks about good. So now I'm just going to round off the edges, give this person some definition, make it look like they have an actual head. And if you hit Control, you can take away, and if you click, you'll add with the sculpt brush. So I'm just going to round off the corners real quick, and I'm going to time-lapse through this because I'm just going to be using the sculpt brush and Control clicking to take away mesh and clicking to add in mesh, and you'll see what I get. The results pretty quick. So here I have just the really rough model. I'm not even focusing on the back too much. You might just want to smooth this out, going to S and using the smooth brush. If I scroll up here, you can see what brush I'm using. But I'm just kind of smoothing out the rest of this now and making sure that I add in the mesh to go right to the edge along where the character is. And hitting Z to go into wireframe makes it a little bit easier. Also, I didn't mention you want to turn off symmetry lock. So if you didn't do that, go ahead and turn it off. Otherwise, you'll be mirroring what you do. Symmetry lock, that's what it is. I called it something else. And the dynamic topology, I ended up going to 4 just for a little bit more detail. But that can be depending on how much particles you want, basically. But now I'm just kind of smoothing it out and doing the last finishing touches on it. As you can see, it looks messy, but that's really fine, and it'll actually work pretty well. So I'm just kind of smoothing out the last bits of our model here. And making sure that I add in a little bit more geometry. You can even hit G and just kind of pull the vertices out using the grab brush in these areas where it isn't going all the way to the edge. Just make it match with the edge and maybe smooth it just a little bit there in the areas that I can, and then grab it right to the edge. All right, but that looks like it'll do it for me. So that should be all I need to do. Hit X to add a little bit more detail. Maybe grab the neck there. I was pulling it back earlier, but pull back just a little bit more, smooth it out. Okay, so this should do it. Right here, maybe just a little bit more. All right, I could tweak this forever, but it isn't going to really show much difference at this point. So that's all we need. Smooth that out a little bit. Perfect. So with that done, in object mode, I'm going to save our project real quick because I don't want to lose all that. But I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the collision object, and that is going to duplicate this, so Shift D, and I'm going to scale it down ever so slightly to the inside. And now I can go into sculpt mode on this object, and it would help if I gave it a different color actually. So just as a quick example to show you guys how to do this, I'm going to open up our window here, and our main cube, I will make a red color. And then our second cube here, I'm going to give a second material by hitting that button, make it a blue material. So we can see where it's poking through. And then in sculpt mode, on our second material, I'm just going to use my sculpt brush by hitting X twice to go to it. And I'm going to hold Control and just erase the mesh, not erase, but shrink the mesh everywhere it's poking out. So this is a quick and dirty way to shrink the mesh in to get a nice result for a collision object that we need to be inside of it. So shrink it down everywhere you see it visible. And back here a little bit. Inside there a little bit. Right there a little bit. All around. I also enabled smooth shading in case you guys didn't realize I did that right here in the smooth shading tab. Alright, and holding Control, we have done it. We shrinked everything enough to the inside, and we can go back to object mode, and we'll be ready to go. So let's quick set up a few materials now. We don't need any material on our inside object. That can we can delete the material there. But on our main object, we're going to be using cycles because it's what I use regularly now. And it's just going to be a basic node. So let me go ahead and split our window here. Go to Node Editor. And for the material, before we disintegrate it, I'm going to go ahead and give it its material. Actually, hold on one second. We should blow it up first. Blow it up as in using the explode modifier. So what I'm going to do is the exact same process before. You add the vertex group, you grab everything and assign it to it. And then you go into your modifier tab, add in the explode modifier. Well, actually, let's add the particle system first. So new particle system, emit at 1, and at 1, no emitter and no field weights on the gravity. All right. So with that done, we have the particles, and I'm going to add in the explode modifier. Explode, and you can see it kind of takes away the smooth shading once it's all blown up into pieces like that, but that's fine because we'll be using a mask to kind of cut that out and apply it. And now I'm going to tab into edit mode and go U and smart or project from view. So I unwrapped it. I can delete the particle system now. And we should have the individual objects. If I tab into edit mode and hit L, you can see if I use face select mode, yep, we have all the different pieces working just right. So you can choose, do I have smooth shading? All right, you can choose smooth shading, but you're still going to get those kind of rough vertices because it's all broken up into pieces now, but that's fine. I'm going to choose use nodes because we use the cycles. And I'm just going to give it the basic, we have to go to material settings here, materials, click use nodes into the material as well. We don't want to diffuse, I'm just going to give it a basic principled shader. So shader, principled, connect that up, and we need a simple image texture. So we're going to go image or texture, image texture, and I can just use the background image, which is already loaded into the cache. So I'm just going to grab that, drop it into the base color. We'll choose cycles or cycle, auto refresh, and then we have to give the number of frames. I'm not exactly sure, but if you just give enough frames, like 250, it will work fine. And if I split this one more time, so we can go to a UV image editor, we can go to that image, and right around frame 74, this needs to update. It's not. Oh well, it will be in the right spot at that point. Trust me, it will be. So I don't know if I update this. Will it update this movie? Movie clip doesn't want to update down there, but that's fine. Right at frame. I'm not seeing it. Yeah, right there, you can see it. It's going to make it behind it at frame 64. So we can just leave that at that, and this will cycle through them, but that's fine because it will use it right at the right point. So with that all said and done, I'm going to move this over, and we're going to add in our collision object just as before to make the simulation happen. So this is going to be, I'm just going to add in a cube for this. I'm going to scale it up, scale it along the Z. And if you don't want it to be a straight wipe, you kind of make it look like it's coming across the bottom or something, you can first of all rotate it so it kind of comes across like that. And then you can add in a few more edge loops and grab these edge loops and just kind of move them around so you get a little bit more variation as well as it kind of comes across the mesh. Something like that is all you have to do. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the keyframe. So I want the disintegration effect to start about frame 75 because that's when it freezes. So right around there is when I want the first keyframe. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a keyframe at frame 72. I I'll just go I, insert location rotation, and then we'll make it happen over the course of about 50 frames or so. Okay, and I never confirmed this, so just to make sure that your image is loading on here, with your image settings here, just give it 250 frames, starting at frame 1, cycle and auto-fetch. I think I already covered that, but you want to make sure that when you go to rendered view, you're seeing the image projected on to that object, and it will look mirrored on the backside, but that is fine. And yeah, that's all you want to make sure, and then you want to make sure that your background is transparent. And then I need to quick set up the lighting for the scene, so I'm going to go ahead and just click Use Nodes in the background, and I'm going to grab an image texture, environment texture, and I'm just going to open up an HDR from HDR Haven. I'll link to it in the description below, but just open that up, and we can delete our lamp here so we don't have any lights. And if I go to rendered view, we should see, let it load, our image there. Okay, now I want to tell it to not render our object or a collision object, so let's just do that while we're thinking of it. So I don't want it to render, let me drag you down real quick, thank you. I don't want to render this, so uncheck the camera there, and I don't want to render the smaller object on the inside here, so don't render that either. This can just be viewed as a wireframe, just like we did in the example. So we'll change it to wire, just so it doesn't get in our faces. And if I go back now to rendered, we'll see that we have it lit and that it's working just fine. I want to quick turn down the amount of strength coming off that background though, as we don't want it to be overpowering. And then just a few settings real quick on the principled shader. We don't want too much specularity, as that's looking really glossy. But I did find a little bit of subsurface kind of look cool. So if we just drop this into the subsurface color, and then increase the subsurf just a little bit, once it's kind of floating and the particles are out there, the subsurf kind of gives it a cool look. So go ahead and do that. But once that's all said and done, our object is ready to be simulated. So we have this rough object with it projected on it. Let's disintegrate it. So the material is working fine. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So we can go ahead and close off this and close off that to give ourselves a little bit more room. And we're going to do the exact same thing with the animating now. So frame 70 to frame about 120 is where I want it to happen. So I'm going to grab this and move it across our object and maybe rotate a little bit just so we get that cool effect coming across it. Right to about there. And then I'll insert location and rotation. And just as before, we need to make sure we have our vertex group on here and it's all assigned. All right, I think I did that already, but just in case, better safe than sorry. And then we have to add the proximity, vertex weight proximity again. Grab the group, grab the target object, which is going to be cube 2. Yes, cube 2, it says right there. And we need to tweak these settings a little bit on our object, but it should be going blue as it comes over it. And right now it's not because we need to change it to geometry. Let's make this a little bigger. Face. And we'll give this a smooth fall off as well. And now let's see if we're getting the effect coming across. Nope, still not yet. Oh wait, I need to just hold up. I'm still looking at it in solid view here, and I need to switch it. Let me drag you down. Hello. Okay, I need to change my viewport color. This is messing me up. We can go back to white here. Let me change that just to 0. Whoops, escape. All right, blend is slowing down a little bit for me here. Let's just go 0, 0. Actually, no. Let's go 1, 1, 1, 1. So we have a white color back. Thank you. And then I'm going to go into weight paint. Okay, and we can see it working now. So we want to come across, and we want it to be completely blue at that point. So I need to tweak our settings. Let's go highest to be about 0.9. And that right now is working. Let's just check to see that it comes across it nicely. And it seems to work pretty well right there. It's completely red, and then it comes across. And we could actually take the highest down a little bit, and then the low down. Well, not quite. It has to be right about 0.9, 0.9. And if I drop it down a little bit, you have a little bit of that gradient, which might give you some better effect. So we're going to go with that, 0.8 and 0.9. And you can see that coming across nicely there. If you want to slow it down a little bit, you can drop the animation by going into your dope sheet here. Just grab your second keyframe on this object and move it out even further, something like 150 even, if you want it to slowly happen across the period of time there, which is kind of cool. So we'll leave it at that. I can turn off the background image now, as that's just kind of slowing me down. And close this up. And let's start simulating it. So we have the weight paint now. All we need to do is give it the cloth simulation and our force fields. So I'm going to go ahead and go cloth. We'll leave it at silk. Give it a, make sure it stays at silk. Okay, silk is a little different, so change it to silk. And then we'll give it a little less mass and a little bit of air. Maybe a little less than 1.8. We'll drop that force field in there, right there. Force field, wind, kind of rotate it towards the camera / away. Give it the strength it deserves, something like 450. And I think I squeaked. About 4, maybe we'll 3 in the noise, nothing too crazy. And let's simulate this bad boy. We have to give it the pinning of the group, and we should be good to go. Structural, I can take that down just a little bit like I did before. Everything else we can leave. I'll take the steps down just so it goes a little bit faster while we're previewing it. And now I'll let it load into the cache, and we'll see what it looks like. And there you have it. So you can see it just totally disintegrating into particles and blowing away in the breeze. Really cool looking. The one thing we didn't do is we didn't grab our collision object. So I'm going to go ahead and go collision, drop that in there. And again, it's going to slow it down now, but it's worth it, I think, at least for your final animation. So go ahead and add the collision to it. You can see we get a much slower frame rate all of a sudden, but it is worth it because you get, as you see here in a second, bum-ba-bum, we'll get some kind of cool particles bouncing off of the frame of it and falling away as it comes across here. This is just kind of ripping off of the body and kind of pulling along the sides there and stuff, and that looks really cool. So there we have it. Now there's one more effect that we can add to this that I didn't show in the example, and that is smoke. So let's add some cool looking smoke to these particles. Alright, so like every smoke simulation, we need a domain, and that is done with a cube regularly. So I'm just going to add in a cube, scale it up so it's big enough to fit our whole scene, and then I'll scale it along the X as well. So it basically fits our whole camera and our whole scene there. Pull it over there just a little bit so it's in everything. And now I'm going to go ahead and give it smoke, and we'll give it a domain, and then it will disappear, and that'll be just what we want. I'm also going to give it a smoke adaptive domain, so go ahead and do that. And now we need another, let me think, vertex group. So for the smoke, we need a separate vertex group. We can't use this one because it needs to be basically inverted, and we can't do it with the settings. Sometimes you can, but we can't in this case. So we need to add another one. So I'm just going to add another vertex group, and this one's going to be group.smoke, just so we can recognize it easily. And I'm going to leave it at that. We don't want this one to be applied because we want this one to be adding the smoke to it. Actually, I can go ahead and apply it. I take that back because I can invert it in the modifier. So we'll just apply it to keep it all the same, and then invert it in the modifier. So I'm going to drop this down and drop the cloth down as well. And I'm going to add in another vertex group proximity. I'm going to choose the smoke vertex group this time, but the same targeted object. We're going to use, actually this is cube 2. I chose cube 3, we want cube 2. Geometry, face. And now I'm going to go into weight paint, and we're going to modify these settings. So I want it to start off blue. So by doing this, I can just give the lowest value a 9 or an 8, and then give the one below it a lower value, and it's basically inverted. And the reason we want it to be inverted is because we want the smoke to be added to the scene using this weight paint. So now you can see it's adding the red across as it comes, like so. And that's exactly what we want. And if we check the other vertex group here, we can see it's basically inverted. So that's exactly what we want. So that's perfect. I can leave it as it is and drop it down. And I'm going to use this one now in our smoke settings. So I'm going to grab our mesh here. Make sure we have the right one selected. This one. Go to object mode. And I'm going to give it a smoke. So it has the cloth already applied to it, but I'm going to add the smoke on top of it. And this is going to be smoke flow. It's going to be smoke. We're going to change the surface emission to be just a 1.1. So it's not emitting smoke too far from the mesh, basically. That's what this means, the distance to emit it from the mesh. We can give the smoke color a bit of a darker color. And then smoke flow advanced, we can use, right here is where we choose it, the vertex group smoke. And then I'm going to go just do a quick test, leaving this at the really low settings of 32, just to see if it's working properly. We'll save our project, and we'll see if it simulates the smoke now. It should be adding the smoke as the vertex group comes across. So right now it's perfect. There's no smoke at all in the scene. But once this object starts moving across, as that vertex group starts to add to the group, the mesh, it will be emitting smoke, and it will be really cool, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And you can see there it goes. It's blowing the smoke as it comes across, and it's adding it, so it's giving it that really cool dissolve effect. That is perfect. Alright, so a few things I want to change though is the smoke field weights. I found the wind affected the smoke a lot more than it affected the particles. So I took the wind down here quite a bit. I'm just going to give it about a 0.2. So go ahead and, well, maybe even 0.1. So the wind doesn't affect the smoke as much as it affects the particles. It gives it a better look. And then we're going to give it a little bit of a slower rising smoke. And to do this, we want to create the density to be a smaller value, because higher values make it raise up faster. But I don't want to raise up that fast, so I'm going to give it a smaller value there. And then with the temperature difference, the same thing applies. So you want a smaller value for slower rising smoke. So I'm just going to give that another 0 to the decimal. And then we can choose dissolve as well. Maybe over about 15 frames we want the smoke to dissolve. Maybe even 20. Just so it kind of floats and then dissolves into nothing. So with those settings applied, let's give it a little higher quality. We'll go 74. And then I'm going to just jump right in here and we'll play it through. Alright, so the smoke needs to be cached in from the beginning. But we can kind of do this by saying, hey, only start the smoke at frame 70. So now it will play fast, and then once we hit 70, we'll start caching it in. So here's what my bake was looking like, and it was looking pretty cool actually, but I do think I have the wind effect turned up too high, and that's why I'm getting this kind of poof that I don't necessarily want. So to get rid of that, I'm going to, I have the wind effect still at a 0.1, and I'm going to drop it down way to about a 0.01. So just the wind is barely affecting the smoke. So with that set up, I'm also going to reduce the quality a little bit, just because this was taking a little too long for my liking. So I'm going to turn the divisions to 2 on my smoke on the high resolution, leaving it at 100 still. So with those two settings done, I can just go ahead and save it, jump to frame 1, and bake all dynamics one more time. Alright, and turning that smoke simulation, or the wind effect on the smoke down, gave it a much better result, just like what I'm looking for there. And you can see that looks pretty cool. Now one thing for faster viewport playback, you can uncheck show high resolution smoke. It will still render it, but it will just make the viewport play a little bit faster. And okay, so let's give a quick material to this smoke, and let's render this animation out. Like I said, we're going to use Blender Grid at the end to render it out, so we can do it easy and not have to have a nice computer or anything to do it using Blender Grid. So I'm going to go to a node editor, and I'm just going to give it a very basic sort of smoke material. You guys might know how to do this, but in case you don't, here we go. It's just, let me go, new material on the smoke domain. We're going to delete this. I'm going to add in 2 shaders. It's going to be the volume absorption and the volume scatter. Volume scatter on top, absorption on bottom. We're going to go add shader, connect the volume scatter on top, absorption to bottom, connect it to the volume of our material output. Then we're going to add in an attribute node. We're going to type this one as color, and we'll shift D it, and we'll type this one in as density. Make sure you spell these right, because it is very important, otherwise it won't work. Then I'm going to add in a multiply node, so it's a converter, math, change it to multiply. We want 2 of these, and I'm just going to connect the color from the color to the value of the multiply, and then this is going to be the color to both of these. And then I'm going to choose the factor of the density and plug it into the top and plug it into the density of both of these. Now I can tweak these values to give ourselves the right color by making this a little bit darker maybe, and the right density by making this probably a bit more. So now I'm going to go to rendered view here real quick, and we'll see if it's looking the way we want it to. So if I switch to rendered view, we'll get a look at what our smoke's looking like. Of course we don't want this to be visible, so I'm just going to grab cube 3, or cube 2 actually. It's cube 2. And if I go into our cycle settings here, we can tell it not to be visible to the camera. And we're getting some interesting effects. We want to turn this to be not visible as a shadow either, because it's shadowing. Okay. And then we have the smoke. and it's looking pretty cool. Maybe a little bit too dense, so I might turn that down just a little bit. I'm going to use my GPU for rendering there too. So I might turn the density down just a little bit, maybe down to 2. But it should be pretty good. We can do some test renders now. And just go ahead and turn your render settings to 100%. And I'm going to use denoising, as it speeds up render times a whole bunch. I can uncheck that when we use the render farm at the end, because it won't necessarily need it. But, you know, I might use it anyways, because it does save some time. So one quick thing before we render that I did not cover is we want to give it motion blur. Motion blur makes this effect really pop. With a lot of motion blur, you get that really kind of dissolvey, eerie kind of effect. So I'm going to give this about a 1.2 on the motion blur. And then we can also give it a little bit of depth of field for some more extra blur. So I'm going to choose limits on our camera, and then depth of field here, I'm going to change it to f-stop and choose the distance to be right around where our model is, and give it an f-stop of about 1. So we get some depth of field, maybe even a little smaller, 0.8. And that will look cool as it's kind of fading away, floating away, and it will look good. Now I'm going to take the samples down real quick. Because I'm using denoising, I can get away with just 30 samples as a test, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to go save, and we'll render. Okay, and there's our render, and as you can see, it's pretty cool with that motion blur and stuff, but there is some issues with our mesh that just doesn't really look quite right. So what I'm going to have to do, and this is what I did in my final scene as well, is I use a mask in the compositor to kind of blend the two frames together, the real video and the fake video, or the CG video you could call it. So to do this, I'm going to go to compositing now. I'm going to choose backdrop, and check our render layer there. It's looking pretty cool. I'm just hitting V to zoom out and Alt V to zoom in. And let's kind of pull these out and give ourselves a little bit of room for some new nodes. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the video in the background. So input movie clip. And let's just grab, whoops, not movie clip, input image. And then if we choose the movie, it will be the movie clip. Okay. And then we want it to be, we'll just make it 250 frames, so it's enough frames. Cycle, auto refresh, and that will do it. So this will be on top. And if I just went alpha over, so color, alpha over, and dropped this video over the top of this one, switch that, you can see we have some issues. It doesn't necessarily look right because of from the edges here are kind of off, and then you also see it in the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mask to delete it from the background, because I have a blank image with no character in the background. And I'm going to animate that in the node editor here to follow our simulation. So go ahead and duplicate your image node here. So we have one more, and open up the background plate here. Again, there's a link in the description for you to download that. And I'm going to use a mask to blend these two together. So I'm going to duplicate our alpha over node here. I'm going to connect this one to the bottom and this one to the top. And we'll see that right now there's no character there. Actually, I can flip that around. We have our character. But this factor is going to affect that character being there. So if you just want to disappear, all you have to do is that, and she disappears. So that's pretty cool, but that's not what we want. I'm going to add in a vector mask, or matte box mask. All right, and if I go to this right now, you can see it's just a square. But I want to view this right now, and then this on top of it. So you can just click on it, and you see your square there. And I'm going to change some of these parameters real quick. Holding shift, I find easier to change these settings, otherwise it just changes them too fast. So I'm going to make it a big box. So make it nice and tall, so it's tall enough here. If I zoom out just a little bit, you can see it's good. And then I'm going to make it wider by increasing the scale along the width here. Alright, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to move it along the X, so it's along the edge here. And starting at frame, well, it's about 70 is when we have it come across. And it's going to go from one side to the next, following our dissolve effect. Now, one thing I found to make this even cooler is if I go to my box mask and I add the lens distortion node, I can get some distortion going on to our node here and giving it kind of a warped edge, which looks pretty cool. So I want to choose fit, and then I can choose how much I want it to be distorted here. So I'm going to add some blur to this. We'll add a filter blur, change it to just fast Gaussian, relative, and we'll just blur it along the x-axis a bit, so it's a little bit nicer of a transition there. Let's give it about a 2. And we'll see how that works. And now I'm going to use this as the factor for the background being erased. And so if I go to that now, I need to flip this around. So we have our character there. But if I move this X value over a little bit more, she gets erased. And you can see it as it comes across, she comes back. So that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And I'm just going to leave that at about a 0.22. If I make this node a little bit bigger, we can see those values a little easier there. And I'm going to animate this now to follow the simulation here. So I'm going to jump to frame 1, or frame, let me see what frame this is. If I scroll here, it's frame 95, right before it really starts falling apart. And I'm going to add a keyframe on the X there. And now I'm going to jump through to the end frame right there when we want it to be completely visible. And I'm just going to move this box over to be right about there and hit I to add in a second keyframe. And now if I play this through, you can see it moves across nicely, following the animation of the collision object there. So now if I check this, now we rendered this frame out, and let me see, what frame was it? Rendered result. It says right here, frame 115. So if we jump to frame 115, it should be the collision lining up pretty closely with our smoke sim. And to see this, I'm going to make this the factor to add in our new object. And we're going to add it in to this one. So after the background's removed, we're adding in our dissolve. Now you can see that it's a little bit behind. It's not, we have too much of her visible here. So to fix that, I'm going to go into the dope sheet here. And I just want to grab my compositing nodes, so these two here. And I want to move them to match that a little bit better. So if I move them that way a little bit, I'm not seeing update. I might have to, there we go, update it. That's too much. But if I go through here, we can find right where it will be right on at frame 115. So we move it just a little bit more, and it's looking almost perfect. Go right about there, and it's pretty good. So you can see that as it's coming across, it's giving into the dissolve effect, and it kind of fades from one to the next, which is exactly what I'm looking for. That's too much. Just pull it back. And we're gonna have to, it takes a little bit of trial and error, but it gives it a cleaner sort of transition effect once you have it set up just right. Okay, so I spent a little bit of time tweaking the mask settings here. Now here's what I found worked for me. Adding a little bit of rotation, because I have it kind of come across the bottom, worked well. And it just takes a little bit of trial and error, but what works nice is if you look at the alpha over and then just kind of line it up with your rendered viewport, you can kind of scrub through it in real time and see if it's going to line up well. As you can see right here, it's disappearing as it's appearing down here, and that's exactly what I want, so I'll know it will line up pretty well all the way across to when it's perfectly black and you just have a little bit of the corner of the shoulder left there, as you can see here, and then it's gone completely when it's all black. So that's exactly what you want to do, and it just takes a little bit of trial and error when you're using a box mask here and your two keyframes. But once you get it lined up, you can see now that I've rendered a frame here. If I go to UV image editor at 110, and if I jump to frame 110 right here. Alright, so there's what frame 10 looks like, and you see that it looks really actually pretty cool. The last thing I had to do is just adjust the colors a little bit, because the colors are a little bit dull in here. Now I could do that by increasing the environment lighting and whatnot, but instead I'm just going to drop in a RGB curves real quick, color RGB curves, drop it right on there, so I can tweak our rendered layer to make it a bit brighter and kind of matching that of the original. Now if I go to here, you can see that this kind of line that is there, if we just brighten it up a bit, we can get it to match almost perfectly. So you don't see that line coming across anymore, and it looks pretty good. So I think we're ready to render this bad boy out. If you just want to check a few frames real quick, that's probably smart. So you're just going to scrub through, check a few frames to make sure it's lined up all across. Then we can kind of crank our settings up a little bit, and then we'll render it out with Blender Grid and get a finished animation. Yes, you can see it's looking pretty cool. Maybe it's a little bit too bright. Take that down just a tad, and I think we're ready to render. So you want to connect your last node to the composite node, and then we have to set up a few render settings real quick. I'm going to add a little bit more motion blur, because I think is really cool, and so the more of it, the better in my opinion. And then you just want to set up a few of your render settings, how many samples you want. So let me go down to performance, or sampling, right here. And let's render it out at about, well, with denoising, if we leave denoising on, we can probably get away with about 200 samples, and that will be a nice clean image. So I went ahead and baked the cloth simulation one more time, so I had all the frames in the cache, just so I could do a finished animation of 200 frames. And I also did it because I moved my blend file, so I want to make sure that the cache is still with it. So before you send your project over to a render farm, it is recommended that it is compressed first into a zip file, so it keeps all the data together, and you get to have all your textures and stuff then connected right. So like I said before, you want to first make sure that all your textures are connected to the textures on your desktop in the folder you're going to be using. So I'm just going to quick check that the texture for my material here is using the texture. Well, it wasn't, so good. I'm changing that to be the one in my folder here that I'm going to be compressing. So do that, and then I want to make sure that the files in my compositor and in my world settings here, that all of these are using the texture. If I jump back in my Disintegrate folder right here, use that one. Good. And the last one over in my compositing, you want to make sure that both your videos are grabbing the one in your folder. So I'm just going to go with that one. Good. All right, we have to change our frames back to 200 so it lasts the whole time. And same with this one, make sure the background plate is taking it straight out of your folder that you're going to be uploading, because you need all of those things to be connected for it to work. So now that that is all done, I can go ahead and save, and I can go external data, pack all into blend. It packed 4 files, and then I'm going to go external data, and I'm going to unpack all into files. I'm going to use the current directory, and it will create the files when necessary, but it shouldn't have to create any because they should all be there. So now if I jump over to my Disintegrate folder, if I go to it, you can see we have our video, our background plate, and our HDR. That's all perfect. And our blend file, basically. So what I'm going to do is make sure this is saved with everything connected. I'm going to go back to our Disintegrate folder. I'm going to jump back, take this folder, and I'm going to compress it. So I'm using, I think it's 7-zip, but I'm just going to add it to an archive here. I'm going to make it a zip file. And actually, this might not be 7-zip. This is just a typical zip program, though. There's plenty of them out there. There's 7-zip, there's WinZip. You probably have one on your computer, so just go ahead and compress it to a zip file. Okay, and it will quickly compress into a zip file. It'll be a little bit smaller too, so a little quicker to upload. And if you're doing it with the blend cache, you're going to want to make sure that your blend cache is in that folder. Otherwise, you won't have your smoke simulation. So I'm not doing the smoke because it's too big of a file for my internet. But if you were, you'd want to make sure that your blend cache is in the folder that you just compressed. Okay, so here we have our finished compressed zip file ready to be uploaded. And so I'm going to hop over to Blender Grid now. Here on Blender Grid, it's really simple. You just have an upload tab here. You're going to browse for your zip file. I'm just going to grab it. Tutorial, right there, my zip file. Open it up. And on my slow internet, it's probably going to take about 20 minutes, to upload. But if you have a faster internet, obviously this will go faster. But it will upload, and then you'll have a chance to change a few settings right before, and then you'll get a price quote, and you can start rendering. So really quick and easy. I just have to let this go, and I'll be back with you guys when we're ready to advance. So here you can see our upload finished, and it's successfully finished, so that's good. And we can change our frame range and our resolution and our Blender version and whatnot here real quick. We have some nice settings that we can last minute changes if we want to. I want to make sure that this is going 200 frames, so I'm just going to set that to 200. And everything else is already set up good. 200 samples. It's giving us a warning because of our smoke sim not being baked, but like I said, I'm not going to render the smoke, so that's all good. And now you just type your email in, and it will email you a link with a price quote where you can start your project. So I'm just going to type my email in real quick, and then we can get a price quote. So I'll be right back with you once I get that email, and we can start rendering. Okay, so the project was submitted, the render time was calculated, and I got a link sent to my email address that all I have to do is click it, and it will take me to this page here where I get my project overview, and I can set up exactly what I want with how long I want it to take to render and how much I want to pay to have it rendered faster. So basically you can spend a little bit more and get it rendered even faster. If I go all the way up to 2 hours, it will be $10 versus if it was like 10 hours, it would take, let's see, $8. So you pay a little bit more to have the priority of getting it rendered as fast as possible. But for me, I'm just going to render it in 2 hours. And I want to save my resolution. I like my sample count. And so this would cost about $10. And like I said, you get $20 free credit with Blender Grid. So that is easily going to fit into your free credit if you want to just try it out. But with that done, we can click render for free, and it submits the render. So now that we submitted it to render, you can see that the progress is just starting. As soon as it updates, you'll get some progress coming in here, and you'll be able to check out the frames as they're rendered by following this link here, and it will show you the individual frames as they're rendered. It'll be uploaded immediately, and you can check them out. So if you see an error or something with your render and you decide you want to cancel, you can always cancel your project at any time as well, and you'll be refunded the remaining balance. So just a quick update, you can see it's been going for about 7 minutes, and we're just about 10% done. And if I click the images here, you can see the frames that are already rendered. And I'm just going to jump into a frame that I've already loaded here, and you can see that it's rendering real nice. So it's looking pretty good. And all we have to do now is sit back and wait for the render to finish. So if you wanted, you could fire up a game right now and play it, and the rendering is being handled on someone else's computer. So you don't have to worry about slowing down your computer with a render, and just sit back and enjoy and wait till the render is finished. And our rendered animation is now finished on Blender Grid. You can see I actually had to do it twice because I somehow selected the wrong file the first time, even though it says it's the same as a different file that I had backed up. Anyways, I did it again, and it finished in just about under 2 hours, so not bad. And you can see I already downloaded it here though, but you can have the download link then. So you just download it, and you extract all the frames into a folder like I have here. You can see I have the frames folder with all of my images there. And now I'm just going to quickly show you guys how to fire up Blender here, and how to, I'm just going to create a new folder, and how to add those frames into a movie. So just a new sequence. I'm going to set the settings here real quick. It's 200 frames, 100% resolution, and 23.98 FPS. Okay, then we go to the video editing. You go Shift A, Edit Image, and you just go to that frame folder, frames, hit A to select all the frames, and add an image strip. You can see here now we have our finished animation with a simulation, and it's all looking really cool. You can see at the beginning here, our mask is cutting off a few frames, and to fix that, all you have to do is jump to frame 1, Shift A, add in a movie, and we can just grab that movie that we used originally, and just make it a little shorter by, I'm going to right-click the end there, so we can grab it and pull it in, and we'll just pull it in for about 60 frames or so, maybe even 70, because the animation doesn't start until then. So drag it back to about 70. This is the audio, I believe, even though there isn't really any audio. Whatever. And you can see here now that we have the original footage until it comes right about there when our disintegration effect starts. So that's going to do it for this tutorial, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and learned some things and have some fun disintegrating anything, pretty much. If you liked this video, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, leave a thumbs down. And I'll see you guys in my next video tutorial. Bye!